Welcome to the Construction Brothers Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Campbell, and with me, like he is every week, my brother, Eddie Campbell.
What's up, Tyler?
Not much, Eddie, and this week we are talking about managing owner's risk. I didn't think I was going to get that, guys.
You did it?
I did it.
Well done, man.
Well, Norine, it's great to have you here. I've heard so much about you. I'm excited to dig into a lot of fun topics today.
Well, it's great to be here. I'm really excited about this.
Before we get started, I have heard that you speak multiple languages. Do you have
Oh gosh.
How many languages do you speak? I'm just curious.
Well,
Selfishly.
actually, I speak 3
Okay.
well, and I speak one other like a 4-year-old. So we don't count that one, but yes.
So I basically speak English like a 4-year-old, so I guess I can't really count that either. Anyway, this is making me feel bad. Eddie, you brought Norine on the show, so I'll let you kind of kick off the conversation here. Pretty excited to hop in, so over to you, brother.
Okay, we've had multiple conversations, and I feel very enlightened every time I get to speak with Norine because she teaches, and that's what we try to do here.
Yep.
Is we try to teach, we try to learn. So there's going to be a lot of that going on today, and I love that we've got an owner's perspective here today, and that we're going to talk about some things that are important on that side of the equation. So I would say, without any further ado to this thing, I would like Norine to just tell us who she is, what she does, and then we'll kick it off from there.
Bring it.
Okay, great. Well, I'm Norine Bagate. I started my career in architecture. I graduated with a B.Arch from the University of Texas at Austin, and I came to New York, which is where my family lived, and I started working in the architectural profession. And 6 years in, I got into project management, and then within 10 years, I was managing a large public project. I also took some detours. I went into the owner side, on the corporate side, and did their capital projects, including starting in-house with an in-house design team, which was very eye-opening. And we did have external consultants, but it was very interesting to try to get at scope with your colleagues. I then moved into a construction law firm doing project management. I am not a lawyer. I don't want to give that impression, but I do understand the tenets of the law as they relate to this domain. And then ultimately, I had an epiphany one day at an AEC Tech conference, and it became the thing that drove me to do what I'm doing now, which is a technology-driven startup to manage what I think is the fundamental problem in the industry, and it's the owner's poorly managed Spirin risk, or in English, scope risk. So that is what I've been doing for the past 6 years. We have really focused on contractual risk transfer and governance of the whole process of every participant in the process of project delivery.
Okay, so I have a stupid question immediately. All right, so is Spirin risk? Am I saying that right? Spirin risk. What do you mean by that? Can you kind of pull that apart a little bit?
Yes. Well, Spirin risk is actually the understanding that the owner has an obligation to define the scope and describe the project before transferring construction risk to the builder, to the constructor. And that is a very loaded thing because most people think it's simply, oh, well, I signed a construction contract and I've transferred risk. But unfortunately, the nature of Spirin risk is all about scope. And scope is all about discovery, quantification, description, and it's deterministic. So what happens is routinely ambiguities migrate from the planning and design phase to construction because the owner goes into the construction contract with incomplete scope. And those ambiguities blow up during construction when you have little influence over controlling them, and it always leads to scope-related escalation, delay, costs change, construction contract costs change. It is just widely accepted in the industry that construction contracts are mutable. Now think about that. What other contract do you enter into in your life where you say, okay, we're going to sign this thing here, but it's going to change almost immediately. And it's going to keep changing until it doesn't. And then we'll know what the true cost and what the true time frame and what the ongoing liabilities from the result will be at the end. It's just insane. And in law, construction contracts are actually always incomplete because the owner has no art to actually drive a deterministic representation of scope. And it's not just what the design drawings say, it's what it takes logistically, other external inputs, other externalities that impact what you think you're going to do. And I think one of the best sayings, there's controversy over who said this actually originally, but it's that the best plans rarely survive first contact with the enemy. And that is true of every construction project.
That's amazing.
Not that we're adversarial in the construction industry, but that resonates so much and is awesome. So can we have maybe a concrete example? Like, what would be an example? Just so we get plain English. Like, all right, poorly defined scope that transferred and ended up unraveling in the construction process, and then we end up in litigation, delays, whatever comes out of it. Like, what might be an example of that?
Well, the most spectacular example, and I wasn't involved on this project, but I actually read it in the New York Times, and this example just made its way through the industry. It would be the new locks at the Panama Canal. Okay, I don't know if you know about the $5 billion concrete change order.
No.
But and I wasn't involved in this. I'm just a spectator too. I just read the article. It was unbelievable. At the very, very early phase of the project, someone says, "Oh yeah, I get it. We're going to have to do some dredging and some excavation, and we're going to use all that rock for our concrete recipe. It's all of this stuff, this excavate's going to go into concrete." Well, a 4-year-old, had they asked any structural or civil engineer, would tell you that type of rock is entirely inappropriate for concrete. And not only that, you're going to have to remove it. You're going to have to stage it. You're going to have to get rid of it. This is all marine kind of construction. And there were just a whole series of assumptions that were made about the cost of concrete and the logistics of placing concrete and the logistics of removing the excavate related to dredging and it was comical to read this article and think, who on earth from the beginning had no idea that this is not at all feasible. And later, when they had an opportunity to intervene and listen to someone who knew, Hill International, the train was so quickly speeding towards disaster, you literally had no recourse. And it blew up spectacularly. The lawsuits started, and it all started with a very, very simple, wrong-headed assumption that was not challenged at the beginning, but was challenged occasionally and at certain points, the closer and closer to when it was obvious there was going to be a train wreck. And that's a perfect example of just how assumptions, no matter how small or simple, can be disastrous. And that is the nature of these kinds of latent discoveries that start very far upstream with the owner and maybe high-level consultants. None of it's in the details yet. And it just keeps going forward downstream. And it also tends to influence cognitive bias, because no one wants to be the person who stops the train as we're all headed towards what we imagine the destination to be. So there's a lot of heuristically driven reasons why participants in the process have a difficult time with the inertia of a speeding train to try to get it to stop, to understand this is not going to go the way you think it's going to go.
There's got to be a little bit of like imposter syndrome that comes up in a job like that too, right? It's who am I to throw something in front of the train and try to slow it down, right? It's who am I to raise my hand if I see something like that? And so often they get pushed back. So there's like the human element of that is totally interesting. But the discovery aspect of it is really interesting. So you're very pro like pushing the discovery process as far towards the owner side as possible. Am I getting that right? Like, what's your method for making sure that something like this doesn't happen?
First of all, and I want to be really clear about this, that discovery burden is on the owner. No matter how hard you shake, you just can't get rid of it, right? Because the owner holds the economic incentives for every other engaged participant and has to understand that there is just a natural human instinct to say yes to the person who is going to pay you and allow you to participate in this economic opportunity. So what we have been working on is, I used to joke and say, people would say, oh, what do you do for a living? And I said, I'm an owner's rep. And so what is that? And I said, well, the owner has a shotgun, and usually that shotgun ends up kind of in the vertical position, and the owner sometimes shoots himself in the foot. And my job is to say, can I please hold that gun? And then I take it and I put it in a corner, lean it against the wall facing up, away from the owner's foot. And honestly, what I do as an owner's rep is I'm constantly looking for emergent risks all around, either knowable unknowns or stochastic events that occur and pop up, and try to make sure that people don't overreact to them, or if they are somehow dismissive of what the implication of that particular event has on the process, to get them to understand maybe we need to understand the context and what this means in terms of further downstream issues. So I'm always looking for change. I'm always looking for answers to simple questions that no one seems to have. And if there is an unknown that's knowable, it is always cheaper to interrogate and investigate and do that due diligence than to find out later when you've made 50 other choices, decisions, and you're mobilized to carry out something that the discovery of some unknown makes entirely infeasible.
That seems in itself to be just like this maddening process. If my job is to just try to interrogate out and keep the shotgun from pointing at my foot as best I can, it's like Lucy on that conveyor with all of the chocolates, like trying to keep one from going by. And instead of like, I have it in my head that you may have an idea of how we could reshape the process a bit. I mean, do you have any good ideas on that end?
I do. Since this really is, at the end of the day, a contractual risk problem for the owner, focus on the owner. And the first thing the owner has to do is understand that it's a digital age, and every contract that the owner uses has to be fully digitalized. Not digitized, not simply turned into a PDF, right? Not simply OCR readable. The provisions of those contracts have to be active, digitalized, and deployable in a BIM-enabled workflow. So we've come up with a meta-governance construct. And what meta-governance means is that anything that involves interaction, transactions, and information is, by the way, the transactional currency of the entire ACOM industry. And the integrity of that data, its provenance, its relevance, its record of that particular data point, even if it evolves, but getting a handle on the transactional currency of the industry, which is information, and structuring it. And I don't mean just coarse structuring, granular computing, where all data is almost self-governing because each data point is granular and it is able to be associative with other data, notwithstanding silo. So the meta governance allows you to penetrate silos in a contractual way. I hope that's not too wonky, but that's exactly what we worked on, and that is exactly the nature of the governing framework in a BIM-enabled digital world. You have to have, because you have to be able to share information without passively transferring or accepting risk from another party. When you have no assurance that that model that I give someone won't come back to haunt me as being deficient, or it's my fault, or there wasn't enough detail, when in fact the design author, who is responsible and carries errors and omissions insurance for that exact purpose, shouldn't be able to transfer the deficits of the design to the structural steel detailer just by sharing a file. And it takes a rather robust information system to accomplish this, which means that we have to finally let go of record-based information systems. And the industry has to embrace content-based information systems. Content-based information systems where all data is extremely structured, and where that structured data understands, well, I may be in this silo, but contractually I have a relationship with data in that silo, and thereby in our meta governance platform, I am able to associate myself with that other data point so that, say, my construction risk insurance provider's underwriting standards are not compromised by something else happening downstream that seems unrelated, but is entirely related, so that we can avoid a claim, or God forbid, a claim arises. We don't have an expansive, well, let's go do the discovery now of the origin of this claim. We can simply query, we can gather in a historical reference, the data is all self-associative, and we can resolve whether it's a change order or an accident on site by someone driving a truck or a piece of equipment from a specific subcontractor. We can quantify the nature of the damage and quickly manage a claim. Also, if there's some sort of omission, and we're human, so there will be errors, especially if you layer on immature technology. What makes these issues extremely expensive is because they get interrogated after the fact. So someone has to go in and figure out what happened and try to figure out why it happened. And then the parties involved all develop a defensive posture. And that takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money. But knowing the facts and having the facts that are immutable and incorruptible format greatly expedites any claim or dispute regarding the project without increasing cost. So if we can manage cost and risk, we can manage the cost of risk and greatly lower the overall cost of project development. And that's really where, I think, Eddie, I shared with you my little diagram where it's like A 5-year-old can understand this. Over here is how we do it now. Over here is what I propose. And there's a huge difference at the bottom line because there is so much ineffective hedging going on with construction cost.
That ineffective hedging is being combated with a source of truth that you're creating. And I want a little just sidebar infomercial. I know this is kind of just a quick off the beaten path, but we said we were going to talk just a moment. You mentioned silos, so in a paragraph or so, everybody's after them, right? Everybody, this buzzy thing like silos, break down the silos, but construction needs them. Why?
Well, not just construction. Silos are excellent mechanisms for containing risk, knowledge, for managing transactions, for implementing rules, for allocating risk. They're useful even within a single business entity. There are multiple silos. Imagine if you're an employee and you have a serious medical condition and HR is aware of it and it's your privacy. Thank God for that HR silo, because would you want everyone in your company to know about it and you've not decided to disclose that information to them? We all have silos, we all have boundaries. And there are industries where silos are regulated. There are some industries where the sales function cannot be connected to the advisory function. In professional services, you have to have your client's interest or other fiduciary arrangements completely separate from your commercial interest. So it's silos are just the way we organize the world. And, imagine, have you ever worked at that company where, their server is a disaster because there aren't enough silos that separate out information, especially in a record-based information system, in a way that allows you to retrieve information quickly and promptly. Some people solve it with, file naming conventions, but silos are a reality. And, some couples, I have a bank account and you have a bank account and we have a joint bank account. And that may be the key to the economic success of that marriage. So I don't understand why silos have suddenly become a problem. I think what the problem is governance, right? I'm more likely to defend a silo when there is no real governing policy or process or approach surrounding whatever asset, be it information, knowledge, an application. I don't know how someone might use or misuse it. That's the role of meta-governance. It allows you to say, don't worry, the environment here, the ecosystem acknowledges the provenance of information. It qualifies that information. There is no way for the structural engineer to transfer the structural design defect to you, Eddie, at ABSI. It's once you're able to implement a real governing framework that allows the piercing and communication between silos without any kind of liability from those interactions, then it's a whole different ballgame. Then maybe I might be able to look at someone's work in progress model, which I need to know before a certain milestone to say, well, that 26-foot column spacing really doesn't work that way.
I love the source of truth. I love that, okay, we're going to play by the same rules now. And we're going to speak the same language now, right? I'm going to come up with a set of terms that we're all going to agree on and speak. I'm going to come up with a set of rules that are going to govern us and are going to be the rules whereby we play. And I will say, after having seen 100 projects a year and been all a part of these different project teams, I discover my new rules for my new project like on the fly as I get into the project. How is this one going to work?
And they change.
Well, and maybe there's some commonalities, and there's always the guy over on the side saying, well, I've never seen it done this way. And, we've never done it that way. It's like, well, the other people have. Now, we're coming up with a process and a system whereby we speak the same language and we play by the same rules. And that is going to aid and abet in us being able to discover later, like any deficiency, what my job was, what their job was. Like, this is going to help me understand the environment that I'm working in.
Right.
Am I regurgitating that with any kind of fairness, Norine, or do you need to now say, no, Eddie, that was a very infantile way of putting it, and I will go ahead and say it better for you.
Well, actually, it was pretty good. I would just make one refinement.
Pretty good.
Here's the refinement.
Yeah,
Here's the refinement. Okay, I can deal with this.
The system is multilingual, okay? I'll give you a perfect example. Say the word ceiling to a structural engineer, and you will hear crickets chirp. You're like, what? You mean the roof? No, I mean the ceiling. Well, the first thing that's going to happen is why are you talking to me about that? That's an architectural issue, right? And it's up to the architect to know, the reason I'm talking to you about my ceiling is that it's supported by the floor, and it's may, under certain conditions, be a dynamic load. Or it exceeds, 100 pounds per square foot. Then I've got my structural engineer's attention because I'm talking about a floor related to that architect's ceiling. But what you can't do is design systems where everyone has to speak your language. In a meta-governance environment where the interfaces understand the tradecraft and the workflow of the professional that is actually the user, then I don't have to talk to structural engineers about a ceiling. I can just simply say a load. And I think, you see so many applications that struggle with this, like, poor Autodesk. It's like, okay, I have to call these things this here. A room is a space when I'm talking to a mechanical engineer. And it's just, don't worry about it. If the system is smart and sentient and you have a common set of uniform, integrated, defined terms, and you just are the best structural or mechanical engineer or architect or geotechnical engineer, you speak your language, your developed tradecraft, your developed technical terms. And the system is smart enough to understand that, that soils mechanics result needs to go to that civil engineer or that particular structural engineer for his foundation design. And it's like dealing with a kindergarten class, right? You have an obligation by the state to serve the children a lunch that's nutritionally valuable, right? They have to get at least 3 vegetables at lunchtime, right? They all love pizza. Just put the cauliflower, the broccoli, whatever, put it all in the pizza sauce, make pizza, and feed it to the kids. And you've met the requirements. I don't care where you put the cauliflower. Put it in the crust. Put it in the sauce. It doesn't matter. But for us to be so hung up on trying to make these possibly 40 different distinct participants in a federated undertaking all fit into the same mold is the first mistake. Let it be. I know when I'm cooking in my kitchen and I have someone who's a Spanish speaker who doesn't speak English, and I have, my in-laws who are here visiting who only speaks French, I actually have a whole list on my wall of every spice, every herb, everything, so that not only can I translate, she wants you to dice, parsley, I can actually show the Spanish speaker how you say parsley in French, It's just, You don't have to do something. You don't have to create homogeneity, because the whole point of a federated process is to benefit from knowledge exchange and expertise. And you don't do that by making everybody homogenous, because you can't. I don't know if that answered your question, but
I have a spin-off question from that, because we're talking about translating and you know, somebody referring to this as a room and another person referring to this as a space. How do you see AI interjecting into that mix? Because I almost see, like, we hear on the news constantly, ChatGPT, like all of this stuff that's out there right now. And it's worth talking about, how can AI, will it eventually help us bridge that gap of communication where so-and-so is referring to a space and AI is able to just say, boop, 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 boop. All right, cool. No, you're referring to this over here, and translate that out to everybody else based off of their needs. Is that possible?
well, first, I think the most robust AI applications in our domain will not be language based, will not be common language based, and that's probably the Achilles heel of chat. You know, it's just there's only so much intelligence you can get from the spoken language, right? There are so many information models in our domain that the best way to be ubiquitous in expression is to structure the data so that, it's our software development partner, Kino, is always telling me in a lovely Jamaican lilt, you know, Norine, at the end of the day, it's just zeros and ones. It's just zeros and ones. And so what we do is we focus on instantiation. So granular computing, which gives you way more robust data that has many more attributes that describe its nature, so that it can, in a meta-governance framework, cross silos and be cross-associative. You're able to accomplish true computer reasoning. I don't mean like the computer's actually thinking, but basically granular computing is the platform necessary to develop advanced AI applications where you can simulate understanding in applications where a data point can understand, oh, in this context, given a very specific granular attribute, this impacts or influences or dovetails with me, data point. So we start with a different concept of AI, which is not where I just sit down and say, hey, you know, how far has the architect gotten into that submittal I sent over for hardware? I mean, that's ridiculous. Why it would for someone to even teach that to Chat API would be just, it's ridiculous to try to train machines and transfer your knowledge to a machine. It's better to create a domain model and information models, structure them appropriately so that the AI is just wrangling ones and zeros. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so embedding that back into more of the content-based systems that you're referring to, right?
Yes.
Like, and when we're saying content-based, we're referring to, I'm going to say high level, like a model, like a BIM, right? This is what we're referring to, right?
Right. It's BIM, but not just for, not just for divisions 2 through 48. Meta governance is actually BIM for divisions 0 and 1. So it's totally native in an environment that is BIM, where some of the BIM data comes from parametric 3D modeling, but it also comes from other sources of data. And its ability to take heterogeneous information from a heterogeneous pool of participants and cross-reference them.
It sounds like in order to achieve this is a full rebuild of all of the systems that we currently use, right? Like from a 3D standpoint, from a modeling perspective, what we have right now is not capable of connecting the dots in those ways. Is that incorrect, or is that kind of what you're seeing down the road? Is that there needs to be a complete like revitalization of all of our BIM software in order to achieve this new level of cross-pollination and, you know, interactivity?
Well, what I'm suggesting is that you use modeling software for its prime purpose, which is to create 3D parametric models. Models make terrible databases. I mean, we all know that. They're if you can liberate the database aspect, and I mean robust data, not just the data of, you know, size, angle, you know, whatever, the attributes the limited attributes that are entirely associated with the modeling effort. If you want to know, I remember once having this experience at a conference when I guess back in 2013 with Revit, right? And the issue was there was an example, and what we were shown was a wall, you know, an interior wall assembly. And it was wonderful how you can just take that stud and iterate that wall section, which is, you know, a couple of sheets of 5/8 inch gypsum board either side of a 3 5/8 inch metal stud. And I raised my hand and I said, I have a question. Why is this useful? And what I was told was it's useful because you don't have to keep drawing that as you would or copying it as you would in AutoCAD. And I said, but here's the problem. I'm looking at that stud and I don't know its gauge. And you know what? The junior modeler doesn't know the difference between a 16 gauge stud and an 18 gauge stud. And one can span, you know, a vertical height of 24 feet spaced at a certain interval. And the other one, you know, don't do much more than 8 feet. And they both look identical. And, you know, suppose I haven't got in and I haven't configured everything and I haven't, you know, I don't have the right, you know, attributes table turned on. And this can get messy really fast. I can't even get people to draw the same thing in AutoCAD, the same from one project to the next. Or, you know, I have a new intern. How is it I'm supposed to control what the spec is of this, you know, 24 feet high span demising wall by simply representing it as a 3D object? And then there's no control after I send it off to someone else. And it's just, how does this help me when everyone is an author, right? I can get any number of creations that don't carry the knowledge from one phase to the next. So that is what I would say as an answer to all of our tech tools. We have too many applications of very low value, and none of them are really based on the same information models. They're not nowhere near the same data models. And what you have is a bunch of people who will come in and try to integrate all of this stuff. And then you have people who build new information systems where you have to do ETL. And the minute you put the word T into E and L, you've lost all efficiency because that person brings their limited knowledge or their cognitive bias or their distillation or conflation of what this data set implies, not being from the domain. And you have a mess and you have a proliferation of a lot of low value data, and no one knows what to believe or to rely on. And so they do work 3, 4, 5 times over because, you know, you cannot necessarily rely on the data that's in front of you.
That's such a poignant thing because we go through all this effort in the modeling realm, and then maybe we just, because of refusal, it's not passed downstream. because we're scared to pass it downstream, whatever was at work, to keep it from going to the next party. And then we have a duplication of effort, or the effort's never duplicated, the information's never used again, it's a complete throwaway to begin with. Like it wasn't really of much value at all. And so you kind of ask the question like, well, why do we even have to do it to begin with, other than to maybe draw a couple of lines on a sheet of paper so that it looks like a 3 5/8 inch stud, so that somebody can look at it on a PDF and go, oh, there's a stud there. And then look at a spec and realize they've got the whole engineering effort and they've got to figure out what the gauge is.
Exactly.
So, how much value was to begin with. And so it's a very interesting thought that we have a lot of throwaway, a lot of reduplication of effort, and a lot of throwaway.
Yeah, we talk about like material waste on site, right? Like that's a big, big thing that we've covered.
What about intellectual and time waste?
Intellectual waste?
Yes.
Yeah, like the rework waste.
Yeah.
That's massive. We talked to Ajibade Ibanu about RFI and the waste that comes from that. There's so much intellectual waste in our industry.
Yeah.
And it's really quite sad. I would wonder what the metric is, what the intellectual waste is on a project.
Well, we wouldn't know. And
would be
isn't it
very hard to
interesting how
quantify.
scope has this kind of like, we run the risk of overlapping and doing the thing twice,
Right.
But then we also have this, nobody did it. So it's like, oh, I've got it. No, I thought you had it. No. And so it's either two people have their hands on it or nobody had their hands on it at all. And there's this, weeding out process of, does everybody know what they're supposed to do? And so if we have a meta governance that is helping us understand, that's your job, this is my job, this is the thing I do, this is the thing you do, and speaks to me in a way that it speaks detailer. Hey, I can understand detailer, right? I want you to speak to me in detailer. I understand that thing.
Yeah.
If you speak mechanical engineer to me, I might glaze over, and I don't know all of those acronyms. Yeah, interesting stuff. So here we are at 54 minutes.
Where did the time go?
I don't
told you.
feel like we've unearthed maybe like a 16th.
Oh, we could keep digging.
I know.
I can promise.
So we need to do round 2, Norine, because I feel like this is just very high level, but there are a lot of nuts and bolts that we can really dive into on this stuff. Just from a curiosity standpoint, I want to dig in more. So
Yeah, I agree. We haven't even gotten into, instance versus existence, and how we have two totally different industries that collide immediately over that issue. In IT, if there's an instance of something, it exists,
Yeah.
even though it's not real, it's not validated. And in our domain, right, if something exists, there sure as heck better be an instance of it in the information record.
So for next time, I'm telling you, man, there's
it's just
there's so many roads out of
it's a
here.
cornucopia. All right. So, all right.
Oh yeah.
But for today, we want to hit you with our megaphone question. All right. It's our favorite question we ask everybody. So, and if we gave you a megaphone that you could speak to the whole construction industry and everybody in it, what would be the core thing you would want to say? What would be the core thing you want people to walk away with and think about in around 60 seconds? We might let you have some more. That's okay.
Well, it's pretty quick. It's that building project risk does not begin or end with construction. If we can just internalize that, it makes us understand that you have to push discovery way upstream at the very earliest phase. You have to validate assumptions with robust due diligence and interrogation of what you think you know. And if there is an unknown that is feasibly interrogated so that you know, it is always better to get rid of any knowable unknowns as soon as possible. And that you carry on this interrogation and discovery process throughout the entire process. So start early, start interrogating early, Start doing robust due diligence early and continue that culture of observation, interrogation, and validation throughout the whole process. But you have to start early, and you have to have a framework or a platform that makes that possible. And it's not with record-based systems where all insight is retrospective.
Oh, Norine, I love it. This is so good. It's so much fun. Thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you. This was so much fun.